Today, we are honored to host Francesca Albanese, UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1966. She will be introduced by Dr. Elizabeth Ferris momentarily. This series started and continues amid horrifying violence and destruction in Gaza, recently and particularly in the north, where Palestinians are under constant fire with no humanitarian assistance. Every day we think the situation cannot get worse, and we wake up to new horrors. More journalists killed, doctors under siege, children murdered, thousands starving. In just a matter of weeks, the war against Lebanon has displaced over a quarter of the population and killed over 2,500 Lebanese. The threat of a full-scale regional war hangs over us. And all of this has been supported and funded by the US government, by our representatives just a stone's throw away. Their complicity means that US citizens and those of us at US institutions have a moral obligation to speak about the grave injustices being committed, injustices that jeopardize the safety and security of everyone in the region, if not the world, including Israelis. It is with a great sense of heaviness and mourning that we gather here today. And as an educational institution, we come together to try to understand what has brought us to this moment. And we have a tremendous responsibility to do so. Before I welcome Dr. Ferris, who will introduce our guests, I would like to read the Georgetown University's speech and expression policy. Georgetown University is committed to standards promoting speech and expression that foster the exchange of ideas and opinions. While it is recognized that not everyone may share the same views as the speaker, it is expected that everyone in attendance at this event respects the right of the speaker and the organizing groups to share their perspectives and ideas by not causing a disruption to the event's activities. At the conclusion of the panel, there will be a question and answer session during which you may ask your questions and engage in dialogue. At that time, we will ask everyone to please phrase comments in the form of a question. And in the interest of time, we ask that each person limit them, be concise, and ask only one question. And I'll repeat all of that when we get to the Q&A, again, just to remind us. So now I'd like to invite Dr. Elizabeth Ferris, who is the director of the Institute for the Study of International Migration in the School of Foreign Service and a research professor at Georgetown University, to introduce our distinguished guest. Thank you.
Thank you, Theda, and it's wonderful to see you all here today, even though the subject is a very heavy one. And I'm delighted to introduce Francesca Albanese, who has been an affiliate of the Institute for the Study of Migration for many years. Francesca is a brilliant international legal scholar. She has written perhaps the definitive book on law and Palestinians. It's a heavy book, a long book, but I encourage those of you who are interested in the legal aspects of the current Palestinian refugee situation to take a look at it. She got her law degree from the University of Pisa. She has an LLM from the London School of Oriental and African Studies. She's worked with the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. She's worked with UNRWA. She's really lived among the Palestinian experience for many years. She now serves as the Special Rapporteur of the Human Rights Council. Since some of these procedures are perhaps not well known to U.S. audiences, I thought I would share with you the mandate that she was given by the UN. This is her job. So the mandate calls on the Special Rapporteur, 1, to investigate Israel's violations of the principles and bases of international law, international humanitarian law, and the Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war from 1949 in the Palestinian territories occupied by Israel since 1967. 2, to receive communications, to hear witnesses, and to use such modalities of procedure as she may deem necessary for this mandate. And 3, to report with conclusions and recommendations to the Commission on Human Rights, now the Human Rights Council, at its future sessions until the end of the Israeli occupation of those territories. So thank you, Francesca, for coming and talking with us and sharing your thoughts on genocide in Gaza right now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I wish to start by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to the Georgetown faculty and staff for justice in Palestine, and particularly Professor Nader Hashemi and Jonathan Sapple for organizing this event and inviting me to share my experience on Palestine through my work as a United Nations Special Rapporteur. And of course, I'm proud and honored to share this podium with these fantastic scholars. I'll get back to Beth Ferris in a minute. Before I start my remarks on the current situation in Palestine and the state of international law, I wish to make two acknowledgements. And I want to start by acknowledging that this university, this institution in where we meet today, was built on unceded ancestral land of the Nacotchtank and Piscataway people, who are the original and still are the current stewards of the land on which we gather today. And as a visitor to this country and someone who was born and raised on the continent from which colonialism and its most insidious form, settler-colonialism, originated as ways to subjugate and depredate the natives, I recognize the profound injustices endured by Native Americans here, 4,000 of whom live in Washington, D.C., and in other places around the world, like Palestine. These injustices remain largely unacknowledged and unaccounted for, and the ongoing struggle on the indigenous people to regain and maintain their rights on their ancestral lands would be less challenging if only institutions like our universities, places where knowledge is created and disseminated, were actually committed to addressing and unraveling the colonial past, beginning by confronting the prevailing colonial amnesia that affects many of them. And while no discipline is innocent when it comes to our colonial past, legal studies stand out for a general sense of denial. And the second acknowledgement I wish to make concerns, in particular, the Institute for the Study of International Migration, the ICIM, which holds a special place in my heart, because nearly a decade ago, at the behest of my former colleague Lex Stackenberg, we worked together for the United Nations Refugee Relief and Work Agencies for Palestine refugees in the Levant. I agreed to lead the new edition of his then 20-year-old seminal book on Palestinian refugees, the book that Professor Ferris kindly referred to. At that point, I had not only worked for about 15 years, mostly with the United Nations, but I had been an avid consumer of academic research and certainly not envisioned myself as a producer of it. So, and among the scholars I consulted before embarking on such a challenging experience, which has taken 5 years of my life, in fact, to complete, it was Professor Susan Martin, who's Professor Emerita on International Migration and founder of the ICIM, who welcomed me and agreed to support my research project, providing invaluable assistance, supervision, and access to the university's remarkable resources, because it was at the time I was living in Washington, D.C. 5 years later, that research turned into a book that, as was mentioned, the Oxford University Press published, Palestinian Refugees and International Law. And over time since then, and even though I had left the US, the relationship with the ICM has continued to grow, particularly with the new director, Professor Elizabeth Ferris, who I'm really delighted to see here today. And I have to say that after meeting many North American or European American scholars, she's someone who really has no issues in dealing with my natural troublemaking attitude. So thank you for that. And now let's start my work in Palestine. For those of you who are not familiar with the work of a UN Special Rapporteur, Professor Ferris was kind enough to read the basic terms of my mandate. But just to situate the system I belong to, UN Special Rapporteurs and independent experts are independent experts appointed by the United Nations to document and report on sensitive human rights issues. Most of us, we are about 50, either legal practitioners, legal scholars, or a mix of both, who have distinguished themselves for their human rights commitment and capacity to also be human rights defenders in the first place. Well, we are now about 55 of us, and the majority of the independent experts cover thematic mandates. So freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, summary execution, extrajudicial killing, prevention of torture. Then there is a small number that covers country mandates, and this is the situation for my mandate. This has been ongoing for 30 years and mandated to look at Israel's violations in the occupied Palestinian territory, namely the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. One of the criticisms that has moved to this mandate is that it's biased because it only looks at the violations committed by Israel. But certainly so, because when the mandate was created, there was no Palestinian Authority. And still, the occupation was 25 years old. So the Palestinians had already been under 25 years of martial rule, with orders, military orders, written by soldiers, enacted by soldiers, implemented by soldiers, and reviewed in military courts by soldiers. And the occupied Palestinian territory is the only place where there is... Hello, yes, there. Is it me? The occupied Palestinian territory is the only place where there is something called juvenile military justice, which is a monstrosity in and of itself, because the reality, and the lawyers among you will know, that military courts are not made to try civilians, are not fit for that. And there have been this use of military courts, which is not exceptional in the case of Israel, but has been systematic in the occupied Palestinian territory for now 57 years, is completely, profoundly against international law. And again, the reason why there was this creation of the juvenile system is to accommodate the recommendations, including of the United Nations and other observers who were asking the occupying power to be more legit, to behave in line with international law. But after 25, 35, 45 years of occupation, I mean, this is something that I was happy my predecessor raised in 2017, because my predecessor, Professor Michael Link, has been the first one to raise the question, isn't it about the time to declare the Israeli occupation unlawful? Because it quintessentially violates the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people by preventing their existence as a people, free as a people, on the little that remain of their historical land. Because the reason why we talk about the West Bank is Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, this 22% of land is what remains of historical Palestine. What prior to the arrival of British colonialism under the guise of an international mandate in Palestine was a land inhabited by a majority of Muslim and minorities, Christian and Jewish people who had lived in relative harmony for centuries. And when the State of Israel was created as a response to a horrific injustice inflicted on the Jewish people with the Holocaust, the culmination of centuries of persecution, but it was a European problem. And the way it was fixed was through colonial means. Particularly Western countries supported the creation of a state for the Jews only in a land that was already inhabited. Now, I cannot say as an individual, I cannot condemn as an individual what many Jewish people took part in, were forced to take part in because they were rejected even after the Holocaust. Now everyone sympathizes with the Jewish people, but we shouldn't forget the countries like the UK, this country, and Australia pushed back boats transporting Jewish Holocaust survivors soon after the Holocaust. And many Jewish people understand the enormous attachment and love that many Jewish people have for Israel. I do understand, because Israel has given them a sense of certainty, dignity, security, and protection. But two things. After 75 years, we cannot forget that this came at a huge price for the original inhabitant of that land, the native people in that land. And that injustice has never, not only it has never been fixed, it continues to be denied, but then the injustice has never stopped there. Even the little that remained of that land, which international consensus has established for 32 years now, that should be the state of Palestine, even that has been land considered by Israel free for annexation and conquest. And for 57 years, Israel, as a state, has facilitated and supported the construction of settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory. Today, there are about 300 settlements, meaning colonies for Jewish Israelis only, on Palestinian land, for 800,000 Jewish Israeli citizens. And again, what I'm going to say is the backbone of the apartheid system that Israel has imposed on the Palestinians. Because while these Israelis who reside on land unlawfully occupied by Israel and expropriated from Palestinians are under civilian law, Israeli civil law, the Palestinians are under military law. And I know some of you might be thinking, oh yeah, but there is the Palestinian authorities. Yes, on the paper, because the reality is that the Palestinian Authority controls very little. Evidence of it is that since the new Israeli government coalition came on board, came to power at the end of 2022, there has been an acceleration of the de jure annexation of the West Bank in particular. And in connection with it, the attacks against the Palestinians in the West Bank have increased at the hand of Israeli armed settlers, supported by Israeli soldiers. Only in 2023, during the first month of 2023, there were 12 attacks that Israeli human rights organizations called pogroms, a word that is deeply evocative for many Jewish people in particular, given what they have endured in Eastern Europe until the last century. And again, the scenes, if you look at the scenes of everything, there is video footage of everything that has been done, unfortunately, most of what has been done. And there was no reaction. But only during the 16 months I was Special Rapporteur before October 7, there had been 460 Palestinians killed, 460 in 16 months, and 60 Israelis. And again, I would like you not to think, because everyone thinks of a conflict and a war, but this is a misnomer, because a war gives you the sense that these are two people or two powers confronting each other, and they're not. The relationship is one between the occupier, an occupier, in fact, an unlawful occupier, because not only Michael Link and scores of human rights experts have said that, but even the International Court of Justice, the supreme organ of the United Nations, this year has concluded unequivocally and based on international customary law that the occupation is illegal. Therefore, Israel needs to withdraw the occupation, withdraw its military presence, dismantle the colonies, and stop attempting to annex the land slated to become a Palestinian state and its resources. And it has also concluded, other than by name, that this is an aggression also marked by racial segregation and apartheid. It has not elaborated upon apartheid, but it has definitely referred to racial segregation and apartheid. Had the court not found the elements to conclude that there was apartheid, it would have not mentioned it there. So, because of this comprehensive unlawfulness, how is possible that the international community did not intervene? Because over 57 years, there have been mass forced displacement. Not only 1947-49, when 750,000 Palestinians were displaced by mainly by modern-day Israel, but also in 1967, when Israel occupied the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, it kicked out 350,000 Palestinians, very much with the modalities of today, erasing villages, destroying civilian infrastructure, and this is why on October 14, I warned the international community that that it was very possible that under the fog of war, as it had happened already twice in history, Israel would advance the mass forced displacement of Palestinians from their land, or what remain of their land, because in fact, the people in Gaza are not even from Gaza. 75% of them are from the modern day Israel. They still have their lands there. And it's, look, there's no way to say that what happened on October 7 was not to a large extent a series of crimes, war crimes at least. Because doesn't matter how the right to resist is recognized to the Palestinians within the limits of the law. The moment civilians are touched, killed, brutalized, or taken hostages, we are in the realm of crimes, and crimes are to be investigated and prosecuted, because one of the conquests of our let's say, not in fact post-World War II system is the presumption of innocence. And there is no, of course, there were crimes committed. But the thing is, and actually without but, and the thing is, I was completely taken aback by the reaction of the international community. Because of course, the Israeli society was profoundly shaken, because while the world had grown completely used to see the bodies of the Palestinians, adults and children, slaughtered, their homes reduced to smithereens for decades, there had been 5 violent military assaults from Israel on Gaza during the previous 15 years, which had caused over 5,000 people killed, including 1,200 children. But this has never registered with us, has it? Because of course, on October 7, and for months, the only thing we have been talking about was October 7. Majority of us, because others, including many Israelis, with the heaviest start, they were suffering for what they were going through. Many of them lost family members and others, but were saying, we warned you. We warned the world against this. Violence generates violence. And an oppressive occupation like the one we have imposed on the Palestinians sooner or later would have exploded right on our face. This doesn't mean justifying. This doesn't mean condoning, rather the contrary. But we cannot kill reason on just in the interest of political convenience. And we cannot decontextualize and dehistoricize what has happened 12 months ago and ever since. Because in this country in particular, you're not alone. I mean, my country joins the circle, and so does Germany and France. Political leaders and most of the mainstream media have continued to recite the mantra of Israel's right, sacrosanct right to defend itself. No question. Israel has the right to protect itself, the territory. It's complicated, but let's say the pre-1967 borders, the security of that and its citizens, but Israel continues to confuse that security with the security of its annexation plan and its ambitions to rule and reign in on the occupied Palestinian territory. And international law is very clear that the right of self-defense, which doesn't just mean what is in common parlance, doesn't mean the right to protect oneself. It means the right of the state to use force that is only possible under two circumstances in international law and in line with Article 51 of the UN Charter, when it's authorized by the Security Council or when a state is under attack or severe threat thereof by another state. And it's the jurisprudence of the International Court of Justice, consolidated jurisprudence that was affirmed in 2004 in the case of the occupied Palestinian territory, and it has been reaffirmed nowadays, on this year, in 2004. There is no question that Israel faces security risks emanating from the occupied Palestinian territory. And the best way to deal with it is to withdraw the occupation and stop oppressing the Palestinians. It's that simple. We cannot claim that Israel's, as this country does, that Israel's right to protect itself translates into the right to oppress another people in perpetuity. This is damaging not just the Palestinians, this is damaging the Israelis themselves. And when the dust settles over what has happened in Gaza, we will see the tragedy that it has been. Not these past 12 months, let's hope no more, have been both for the Palestinians and the Israelis, because they will realize what they have done, and it will be hugely traumatic. Because everything has been documented by the soldiers themselves. The destruction of Gaza is nearly complete. 90% of the people in Gaza have been forcibly displaced, up to 10 times. Imagine being forced to leave your home under a rain of bombs, not for one day, for 1 week, for 1 month, but for 12 months in a row. Doesn't matter if you are young or old, if you're pregnant or if you're elderly, if you're disabled or if you have medical conditions, you leave and your home gets destroyed behind by a cheering crowd of soldiers who then put the video of your destroyed home, the destruction of whom has been dedicated to a friend or a fiancé, and whatever is not destroyed is violated. there's been a gamification of the violation of the intimacy of the Palestinian belongings left behind, but those fleeing. And, and everything has been targeted, not just military bases, schools, universities, all universities have been leveled to the ground. There is no more university in Gaza. Gaza had the highest number of people with university degrees, and this is not exactly because it was for free in Gaza and they were giving away degrees. No, it's just because people who have lost everything tend to highly value education as the only thing that is nurtured inside themselves and cannot be destroyed other than at the price of taking your life, as it's happening. Entire generations have been wiped out. It's estimated, and it's a conservative estimate, that 42,000 people have been killed by bombs and snipers, 17,000 of whom are children. Let that sink in for a moment. I mean, I tell my connationals, if we said, and we are in Italy, the number of Italians is tenfold the number of Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory. But I said, if I told you that 17 Italian children have been killed, how would you feel? And you see the horror in their face, because something doesn't register when you say 17,000 Palestinian children. This is testament to the racism that certain people carry. Not to see the other as human starts with this, with the fact that we value life and death according to the nationality or the religious group. And again, Israel has bombed and destroyed literally everything necessary to live in Gaza. Wells, farming land, fishing boats, bakeries, churches, mosques, homes in which people had invested life savings. Nothing is there anymore. UNRWA premises, all UN premises, 70% of them have been either destroyed or severely damaged. And the United Nations have never been attacked as in the past 12 months. Over 200 UN staff members were killed, together with 150 journalists and other officials and figures of the United Nations have been attacked as anti-Semites, supporting terrorism, and the list goes on. Look, I've concluded two more things I wanted to share with you before opening for questions and answers. I've concluded in March this year with others, and there are Israeli scholars, experts of genocide, together with leading genocide scholars, that what Israel has done, my amount to acts of genocide, I've concluded in March that there were reasonable grounds to believe that Israel had committed acts of genocide in three respects: causing the killing, the deliberate killing of members of the group, the deliberate infliction of severe bodily or mental harm to members of the group, and creating the conditions that would lead to the destruction of the group in whole or in part. What constitutes genocide is established as at Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, which says, and this is very specific to this crime, that in order to have genocide, these acts should be committed with the intent to destroy the group in total or in part. And I have concluded, together with other experts, but is it not that ostentatious, the genocidal intent in this case? And it's been said, words are not enough. In order to establish genocide, jurisprudence looks at the opportunity, the capacity, and the practice. Not only it's been said, we will destroy the Gaza, it's a responsible nation, there are not uninvolved civilians, there are no civilians, there are human animals, and we will destroy the Amalek. For me, this is, after 1 year of being forced into chronicle the genocide, something that I took on very reluctantly, trust me. This word will stay forever with me and with others as the word that has marked this genocide, because the Amalek might mean nothing to most of us, but it's a biblical exhortation where in the Bible it's said to go and destroy the Amalek, the mother, the suckling, meaning the baby, the camel, the donkey, and everything. And this is what has been done. Netanyahu has evoked, the prime minister has evoked this term, and it has been used through and through, and there are hundreds and hundreds of pieces of evidence stored, collected by various investigators who are working on the case. Probably the most comprehensive collection so far was made available by the South African legal team in their submission, for those any who was curious to look at it, to the Security Council earlier this year. And against all this, the International Court of Justice for 3 times has first of all, it has recognized the plausibility of the risk of being in breach of the provisions protecting the rights of the Palestinians under the Genocide Convention, which means the plausibility that genocides could be committed. Again, I understand that people challenge this, but seriously, let's be logical and beyond semantics. If there is the risk that the rights protected under the Genocide Convention are infringed upon, there is a risk that the crime is being committed. And several recommendations have been made to stop, without even for the court to look at the merits of the case, to stop the conduct that would result in genocide, and they have been violated through and through. And I've concluded in my last report that was made public today, which is called Genocide as Colonial Erasure, and it walks on the heels of the report I published in March. In March, I said Israel has not denied to have killed people in safe zones under once they had received evacuation orders while they were being ping-ponged and corralled in unsafe areas. It has justified that. It has said that they were terrorists, accomplices, or a responsible nation. And in fact, the way artificial intelligence has been used proves that nothing that was done in Gaza as of October 9, which for many experts studying what's happening marks the beginning of the genocide, when the order was given to destroy Gaza. Well, then the situation has escalated in an unprecedented way, and Israel has justified what it has done by distorting the language of international humanitarian law. The last point is that I added to this not only clustering patterns like massacres that have been committed from March until the end of September at an intensified pace against a devastated population. Really, when we will see what has been done to the people on Gaza, we will be ashamed that it has happened on our watch. And I say that having been forced to look at a little that has transpired of what they have been enduring, adults and children alike. And it's been also devastating to see young Israelis not seeing what they were doing. So it's been very heavy. And again, it is, as I say in the report, the court cannot miss the forest for the trees. Need to look. You cannot look for genocidal intent with a microscope, because genocide is an insidious crime, but it's a collective and complex endeavor. And if you take a step back and look at the totality of conduct against the totality of the people in the totality of the land, and put all these elements together and look at what a state that claims to be a rule of law system with separated powers, you cannot claim that this has been only the acts, the atrocities intended by a group of government officials, because what were the other government officials doing? They have supported, aided, and abetted, and even further enabled what the war cabinet has done. And what was the judiciary doing? It has kept on passing laws to make the treatment of Palestinians harsher. And what has the parliament, and what has the judiciary done, especially after January 26, when the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to investigate and prosecute genocidal incitement? Nothing. So again, this is the first settler colonial genocide to ever appear before an international tribunal. And I truly hope that an opportunity to deliver justice to the Palestinians and in a contorted way to the Israelis as well will not be missed, because only by restoring justice there is an opportunity that peace will be brought to that land, and somewhat it will be a recognition that justice is possible also for other indigenous people. Thank you.
So I invite questions. There's a mic here in the center. Sorry, Francesca. I just want to remind everyone that I'm inviting questions and not comments. So just, if you please line up at the mic if you have a question. And please try to keep your questions brief, concise. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to hear your response to the Israeli objection to your suggestion that withdrawal from the occupied territories would solve the problem. They would say, we did withdraw from Gaza and look what happened on October 7th.
We're going to take 2 or 3 questions and then 3 questions and then give Francesca a chance to respond.
Hi, thank you for doing this. Can you speak to the role of media, especially in countries that are supporting the genocide, ethnic cleansing, whatever the legal term is, agreed, and how sort of this domination of the narrative of what's happening is actually helping bring the public opinion support for sort of this cycle of the violence and the support, especially the United States. We know they're funding, supporting, arming, providing diplomatic cover for the attacks, and then also government officials attacking you as a UN official. Thanks.
What do you think we can do when, you know, every protest, every person bringing it up has been doing so for a year and it's only gotten worse?
You want it? Okay, let's take a couple more.
This might be a very forward-looking question, but what would an investigation into genocide look like? Who would take the lead? How would the Palestinians be involved? How would Israelis be involved? How would the West be involved? Who would try these people? How would we investigate? Where would they be tried? Where would they be held? So just how would an investigation and justice, what would it look like?
Yes, thank you for the lecture. It was very informative. My question is, how do you explain the lack of action on the Security Council or the UN? And it seems like they're like paralyzed. They're, whatever decisions they make or agree on is just discarded by the Zionist state of Israel.
Very bad because they are lying. So you want 2 more and then.
Okay.
Hi, thank you. As I'm sure you know, Abbas was a welcome guest at the BRICS conference in Kazan last week, and that this issue was obviously on everybody's mind at that event, which is an extraordinary event. You now have 22 nations, something like 60% of the human race participating in this alliance of nations opposed to colonialism in general, not only to Israeli colonialism, but to the remnants of colonialism worldwide, which is what they're trying to address. And one of the issues to be addressed is the economic disintegration of colonies, both that you're discussing and that is still the case in much of the world. The former colonies who have never really escaped the colonial input of the IMF, World Bank kinds of policies. So the question is, how do we get a development program of the sort that BRICS is promoting, like the Belt and Road program from China and so forth, as a basis for putting forward a development plan for the entire region, which could actually address the needs of both sides and all peoples, but do it through the idea of finally creating an actual viable economic infrastructure for the people there.
Hi. So clearly the UN has been somewhat limited in acting on the information they produced. So if international institutions are failing, who or what do you think can be the catalyst for change to end the occupation?
Thank you. First of all, I owe an apology to Lina because I wanted to thank you. When I was there, I was just blanking on your name and voila. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, but I said, yes, no one remembers. I'm very bad with names, but I wanted to thank you. My brain is really frying. So the withdrawal from Gaza, what happened in 2005 is that the state of Israel, under the leadership of Ariel Sharon, withdrew the colonies dismantled the colonies in Gaza, something that has had a huge impact on the radicalization of the settler movement. And again, there is a lot written by Israeli scholars, Nurit Peled on this. But the colonies are evidence of colonization, not of military occupation. The military occupation exists when there is effective control of the territory, which in fact remain, because after 2005, not only Israel has maintained maritime land, access through sea, land, and air over Gaza on all borders. It has sealed all borders. It has continued to control the currency, the civil record registry, the telecommunication space, the natural resources. Have you seen how easy it has been for the Palestinians in Gaza to starve after October 9? Because Israel controlled and could turn off water, electricity, and provision of fuel and other means. Plus, one of the two critical elements are that Israel has controlled the caloric intake that an average Gaza was allowed to have, which means that, in Gaza there were also wealthy people before October 7. So but the majority of the people were living on hands out provided by humanitarian organizations. And because of the violence and the war, 90% of the children before October 7 displayed depression-like syndromes. Let's not even go into what their parents were experiencing. And the other critical element is that after 2005, Israel retained unilaterally the right to carry out preventive strikes, meaning what the Israeli army used to refer to, let's say, an awful expression, to mow the lawn and to attack Gaza. Of course, it was a ghetto. It was a ghetto where and people had no freedom, and the violence was extreme. And plus Hamas, after the Hamas was not the kind of entity that it has, it was born under also with the support of Israel to break the secular leadership of Palestine. But it was born like a welfare organization, and then it became a political party in response to the Oslo Accords. There is no question that Hamas has committed orchestrated crimes against the Israelis. But Hamas would have not become the force it has had not there been that level of oppression and the occupation. Because I was in Gaza and others have documented it. There were several attempts from the people in Gaza to overthrow the regime, to overthrow Hamas, whose first victims in Gaza were the Palestinians. All those after 2000, after they won the election and then they were rejected by the international community, there was an internal fight that lasted almost 2 years. And many Palestinians affiliated with the Fatah, the main opponent, were killed. And so the system pre-October 7 was very convenient to the Israeli government, which has often referred Netanyahu first and foremost, but also other members of his current cabinet, to Hamas as an asset and the Palestinian Authority as a liability. So again, I take your question as referred to by the Israelis, meaning if we withdraw with Gaza, from Gaza, look, we will have another October 7. This is a very racist thought. It's and we should really question this kind of thought, meaning that people, if they are let free, they will turn into barbarians. It's like opening the cage. What is it? It's not that the Palestinians are naturally prone to violence. They want to live a normal life like anyone else, and don't believe the monstrosities that are told, because they are not true about the Palestinians today as much as they were not true about the Jewish people in Europe 80, 90 years ago. Because if you read the acts of proceedings from the Nuremberg and also the Nuremberg trials, you will see that Jewish children were reportedly killed because they were seen as a security threat. So we need to know the past in order to prevent it from returning. The role of the media, where to start? Look, I think that this is not new, in the sense, if you look at the acts of the criminal proceedings, both in Rwanda and in former Yugoslavia, you will find that the media often play a critical role in genocides, in the sense it amplifies it takes sides. The mainstream media tends to be complacent with the ruling power and become a tool in the hands of the genocidaire. What is really critical here and absolutely shocking is that this is not Israeli media. Actually, we owe much of what we know, for example, on some of the crimes that have been committed through artificial intelligence to courageous Israeli journalists. And there are many Israelis, not as many as they should, and not as many as we need, but it will change. There are many Israelis who oppose this system, oppose what Israel has been doing as of October 7, and without denying what Israelis have suffered on October 7. But again, they can avoid the contextualization. So what I've seen the media doing is replicating, giving a platform to the Israeli army, as it was, again, doing what I've called the humanitarian camouflage, justifying the violation of international law, the violation of the principle of distinctions, of proportionality, of military necessity. And again, the Palestinian population has become a population of human shields. But in fact, the human shields that we have seen evidence of were used by the Israeli army. And how do we know that? Thanks to the Israeli media. And again, also the media, but also some politicians, including in these countries, have talked about the beheaded babies. There were no beheaded babies, which doesn't take anything away from the crimes that have been committed on October 7. But why this really this fascination and this toxic propension to magnify brutality and mass rapes. There were no mass rapes. I mean, there was no evidence of mass rapes. There is a commission of inquiry which was investigating. We cannot discard that there might have been incidents of rapes, but why? We don't know. But there is clearly no evidence of mass rapes. And while there is, so the question is, why there is no outrage for what Israeli human rights organizations have reported being networks of torture across across Israeli detention centers post-October 7. And this was not, I mean, Palestinians have been systematically abused, often tortured. We know that through Israeli organizations mostly, because the Palestinians were not allowed to get into Israeli prisons. And also some Western correspondents, including the DSS, I think it was CNN, who entered or accessed some of the witnesses. So, and again, there is, if I had to be very blunt and brutal, I think that our societies have a huge problem with racism that can decline in different forms. Clearly, we have not dealt with real anti-Semitism. I hear that. It exists. And now I'm also more alerted to what it is. And it's repulsive and it's disgusting. And I say that especially among Western fellows and especially among European fellows, this is something that should not, must not come back ever because of the history that we have inflicted on these people. At the same time, critiquing the state of Israel is not anti-Semitic. So we should not conflate the two things. And the thing is also, sorry, I wanted to say another thing. And yeah, but there is also another problem that is evident is the fact that there has been an increasing level of racism against Palestinians. Anti-Palestinian racism goes completely undetected. If half of the things that are said about the Palestinians were said about the Israelis, and most people will be in jail. And the thing is that we need to treat individuals equally as human beings. We cannot be sensitive on language toward one group while being totally abusive toward another. So the media will be dealt with one day, I hope. But we have to be the guardians of some basic principles, because it seems that, I mean, again, I encourage everyone to read Primo Levi, who's a Holocaust survivor from my own country, Italy. And he has written memorable, very accessible, fundamental pages that show the risk of return of fascism when the reason gets on a sort of, dozes off on a sleeping mode. Look, what an investigation looks like. I cannot tell you. I don't want to speculate. I cannot tell you. I cannot elaborate much because I've not been thinking of that. But first of all, this is something that is not different from what has been done with other crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity. You look at the facts. You look at the facts objectively. You collect the evidence, and then you analyze it against international standards. There is, not extensive jurisprudence on genocide. But there is, and it's very telling. I've tried in this last report to give a sense of what is genocidal intent attributable to a state. And so much can be derived and drawn from that jurisprudence. But there are two things that I'm compelled to say, is that there are two types of investigations. And the threshold for the evidentiary threshold cannot be the same. Because first, there is criminal responsibility of individuals, and genocidaire or alleged perpetrators of genocide can be tried by the International Criminal Court, but also other tribunals, because state parties to the Genocide Convention have an obligation to prevent and prosecute and punish the crime of genocide. And so this can be activated. Investigations can be also launched by by domestic courts. And then there is the responsibility of the state that can only be investigated by the International Court of Justice. But again, if we used the evidentiary standards set to ensure fair trial to alleged perpetrators, we would never, and we need to wait for that trial to be over, assuming that one prosecutor initiates such a trial, then there would be impossibility to prevent genocide. The responsibility to prevent genocide arises the moment the risk is there. And that risk was identified on January 26. As of then, the responsibility kicks in, including for states who had the obligation, the legal obligation, not as an act of charity, not to aid and assist a state who could be plausibly commit acts of genocide. And this is why I really hope that this country, with the wonderful lawyers it has, will look into these and try to contribute to the advancement of justice.
Question from online related to this point you just made. So there are a group of students at St. Joseph's University who watched you online, and they have a question, which is whether, since Palestine is not a state in the UN system, how is it able to access laws and resources? And I would add the courts that you were just talking about. So as a non-state actor, what kind of rights do they have?
This is not accurate, because it's not true that the state of Palestine is not a state. Under the Montevideo Convention, which is customarily looked at like the criteria to recognize the existence of a state, recognition by other states is not a founding criterion to have a state. A state exists when there is a government over a territory, over a people, which has the capacity to establish contact with international community. And I think there are 136 states recognizing, more or less. Don't take me for granted. I mean, to be checked, who recognize the state of Palestine, which is also a member and no, with observer status at the UN. So it has accessed the main treaties. It has an authority, the Palestinian Authority. The point is that it's a state born in captivity. In 1988, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was the government in exile of the Palestinian people, voted for the establishment of a state in whatever territory remained, meaning in the 1967 occupied territory. So in 1974, they had renounced the liberation struggle, the idea of taking the land back from the settlers. And in 1974, they formulated a one-state proposal. They said, we can live together, but the refugees need to be allowed to be back. And it was, of course, it never materialized, but even after the Oslo Accords, what should have become the full and sovereign independent state of Palestine has not materialized, because the Oslo Accords were never intended to grant independence and sovereignty to the Palestinians. They were an interim step to consolidate control over Israeli control over Palestinian land. And and so the Oslo Accords have not been a failure for the Israelis. They've been successful, I mean, in further dispossessing the Palestinians. And this is not the first case, because even in this country, I mean, I was reading a book some time ago about how, the Native American rights were violated despite treaties signed with them. So there is some precedent to the Oslo Accords. So, and again, so the Palestine as even if it's not fully sovereign and it's considered a state, the point is where it's very hypocritical to be a broker to the two-state solution and not even recognize the state and vote against the state of Palestine, the recognition of the state of Palestine inside the UN. So I said, and the court has confirmed this, enough with the two-state mantra if it's not premised upon the right of self-determination of the Palestinians, which again means the right to be free, either in the form of a state or with full citizenship rights without discrimination. It must be either or. The lack of action at the UN level, well, the UN, we shouldn't dream. The UN is a reflection of the world order. And this world order was designed and devised in the aftermath, in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. It has evolved from a group of states which were fundamentally colonial powers and some other states which are gained independence by then. But the majority of the member states who compose today the General Assembly gained independence from the colonial system after the 60s and 70s and through the 80s and some even after that. So some states are even decolonized, have decolonized themselves very, very recently. So the system is not equal. The voting patterns in the UN Security Council reflect that, the fact that there are some states with veto power. And there is no question that there is a clear imbalance and in favor of Western countries. But this is, and this goes also to the next question regarding BRICS, which frankly, I'm sorry, but I don't think there is any human being in the world, surely not here. I'm not going to be able to answer that question of yours. It's very complex and requires a lot of reflection. What are the implications? How the system discussed at this BRICS meeting in Kazan could take place. I just briefly read about it, and I agree with you. It's interesting. It's also scary, and in a way disappointing. Not scary. It's disappointing. As a Western person, I feel really disappointed because we had, as Western countries, we had the opportunity to really be a model in many ways because of the development we had reached decades ago before turned into extremely destructive and greedy. And we could have used our soft power, but recognizing the injustices of the past. We should have really atoned for what we have done through slavery, through colonialism and other forms of oppression of native people. We cannot continue without poking our colonial undoing our colonial amnesia, and therefore I think that the system nowadays it's facing a critical challenge, and it might collapse in its entirety. And I fear that because we will miss human rights when we don't have them anymore. We will miss the UN when we won't have it anymore. And the order that might come next, I don't take it as for granted that it will be a better system. Again, I really saw the potential and the value of having political system premised upon freedom of expression, freedom of association, and fundamental civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. This is the challenge that we have completely missed. This is where we have failed as international, as Western countries, Western societies, and we can still come back. I think we are suspended, I often say, between the precipice, the abyss, and hope. Hope comes from the Palestinians and the Israelis who resist and can imagine a decolonized future, and from the youth. Frankly, I really praise the many of you who have shown older people what it means to walk the talk when it comes to human rights. So thank you very much, and also thank you to the scholars and the faculty members who stood in solidarity, but not in solidarity, with a sense of responsibility with you. Because this is what conscientious people do. And we need to continue. There's no, I know that this is, I could hear the strong emotions in the young lady who asked this question. I've realized how these moments, these conferences, even international law lectures turn into a moment of collective grief. because there is no other space in our societies to elaborate that grief. We need to accept that some of us deal with it by hiding themselves in denial, others feel enraged. But let's turn this feeling into something useful. And there are actions that can be taken to stop the system. You have already started. This country, and especially I was so impressed with what young Jewish Americans have done since October last year. I was here, I used to live here 10 years ago. So I was very familiar with the wonderful work of organizations like in Jewish Voices for Peace. But still, as of October last year, I saw a new generation, and it's impressive. So join forces with those who are already working in this to change the system. Challenge your political representatives and also challenge the media. And this in this country, the boycott, divest, and boycott, divest, and sanction movement is it's almost in some states is criminalized. This is not normal. The BDS is an act of protest premised upon international law emanating from an ICJ advisory opinion, and this is what has led to has contributed to lead to the end of apartheid in South Africa. Why it cannot be applied here? And even now, there are Israeli citizens asking for international pressure to lead to sanction. And I think that this is it.
This last bunch of questions.
Yeah.
And then, yes.
Hi, I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on the death toll currently in Gaza. We have some estimates from the health ministry, which are on the low end and seem to be less reliable as the system breaks down. And then if you extrapolate from IPC famine reports, you get a toll that's actually higher than those initial deaths, but also that's very vague. And then you have something from the Lancet, which seems somewhat of speculation, basically. So I understand you can't put a exact number on it, but given your experience in the region, roughly, how would you approach that question?
Hello. So I'm a student legislator from the University of Maryland, and currently we're trying to get a divestment resolution through the student government. So I just wanted to ask you, why do these resolutions matter even if they actually don't achieve their aims? Like, why do we keep fighting for these things, even if we know that university administrations or those people won't listen? Thank you.
Hi, thank you for being here today. You mentioned the death toll of 40,000, 30,000 of whom are women and children. I think it's pretty clear that these atrocities could not have been committed without a massive infusion of U.S. military aid. And I was wondering what you think it would take to get the conversation in this country to change around the provision of military aid to Israel. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for speaking up for the Palestinian. I'm Palestinian, born and raised in the West Bank. And at a time when we were watching the suffering of my people and the ethnic cleansing of, like today, like 900 families were totally erased from the civil registry. And I always say, oh, when is my family is going to be next? And a time when we're seeing that this whole big silence is happening. What else within this very documented genocide? Like we can see it, everybody's seeing it, and there's like this silence. What else should we do to keep our voices heard at this time of silence? And a time when you ask for your right of determination, they say, but you're not ready, neither like financial wise or political wise. Can we just decide? And they would like, oh, if we open the door for you, like a zombie is gonna come out. And can we just decide? And like, what else we should do to get our voices heard?
What is the United Nations doing to leverage the BDS movement to end the Israeli occupation? And just to build upon what we can do, I think every action matters. And sometimes some actions like boycotting Starbucks, not having a coffee, not having Coca-Cola is looked down upon. How important are they to kind of mobilize the BDS movement? Thank you.
Hello. So, since Palestinians have a right of return, I was just wondering, assuming that a two-state solution does actually materialize, how would or how can we see Palestinians practice their right of return to occupy, or I guess stolen land that was stolen upon the inception of Israel in 1948, basically? Thank you.
Hi. This is a little off topic of what you spoke about, but I have friends that are serious Christians, and their response to me when I talk to them about Palestine is the Bible says that this is Israel's land, and that we won't discuss it any further. I think this has been used greatly to support this genocide, and I'm wondering, when you come across this question, or if you do, how do you answer that? How we are using the Bible to support a genocide, how we are using the Bible, we are using this. Yeah, that's my question. How do you deal with that question? Thanks.
Share one. Yeah.
One of the questions from online, there are several folks who asked a version of what do we do? What do we do here in the US? But there's also a question about the particular challenges that genocide in a settler colonial context poses to the ICJ in comparison to other cases of genocide. So what are the particular challenges that genocide in a settler colonial context poses to the ICJ compared with other cases of genocide?
Okay, on the first question regarding the death toll, I'm afraid that my experience in the region does not really include asserting the death toll. I do not have that capacity. No one has, in fact. It's easier to establish how many buildings have been destroyed, because you can see that from satellite imagery. You cannot determine how many people have been killed, because many of them have been smashed into pieces. Many of them are between 4,000 and 10,000 are missing and probably under the rubble, or been disappeared, abducted by Israeli forces. It's unknown. So the estimates I refer to, there is pretty much consensus, if we can speak of consensus among UN organizations and other experts, that this is a conservative estimate, but this is based on the count that has been possible. A few weeks ago, the Ministry of Health presented a list of all the peoples who had been identified. I think there were 42,000, and the first 700 of these people were age 0. So they were not even crawling when they were killed. The Lancet months ago offered an estimate that, now I'm not a medical expert, but it doesn't read as mere speculation. In the sense, it estimates how, based on other conflict with the kind of violence and weaponry used, it concludes, and also based on the population density and the conditions of life that have been imposed on the people in Gaza, it estimates that the people who lost their life, in fact, in Gaza in the past 12 months, this was July this year, are 186,000, because this would include the people who could not be cured, either people affected by leukemia or cancer or other treatable diseases, but even people who reported wounds that got infected, that couldn't be cured because there were no medications. whatsoever for many months in many hospitals, including field hospitals. I mean, in certain areas there are no hospitals anymore. So there are when you hear hospitals, it's a field hospitals, meaning a tent. There is no. I mean, then prenatal care has been destroyed or severely affected. So it's very difficult to take care of. The health system has been nearly decimated. So we will only be able to count, to have an idea of those who were killed in years, when the mass graves can also be exhumated. This is what I can say, but doesn't really matter. Yes, it does, because every life counts and every death counts, and at the same time, people are not numbers, and this should have been stopped months ago on the ground of the law, because again, a society, and in this case, a global society who accepts to be conducting itself against the law or above the law, it's a society that has embraced or is ready to embrace lawlessness. And this is what has happened. Because in March this year, I said, if this Israeli conduct of considering everyone killable, everything destroyable under the ground, I mean, on the ground of security, killing terrorists, is condoned, it will be used again by Israel and others. And this is the thing, it has been, the same script has been used in Lebanon, and it is being used in Lebanon. And look at the sickening mentality of some of us. I mean, there are people in our part of the world who have been in awe when Israel, because there is no question anymore that Israel is behind the explosion of the pager system, which blinded 500 people and killed many more in Lebanon. And people were, oh, look at how genius this system is. But do we realize the kind of violence this carries? How come we are not shocked? Is this not a terrorist attack, as it kills civilians who have nothing to do with what? And again, look at the level of attacks. I'm not justifying Hezbollah or Hamas. I'm just putting things in context. Look at the attacks carried out by Israel in Lebanon in the past 12 months alone, and then look at the attacks from Hezbollah. And then you see the reality. Again, if international law meant something, you and I would not be talking today about genocide. I mean, we would be talking about something completely different, I'm sure. Why resisting? The question was not that, but it sounded to me like, why resisting through protests matters? Because this is who we are. Eventually, what is in international law, it's true, it's binding for states, but eventually the UN Charter, and it might sound cheesy rhetoric, but it talks about we the people. And so we need to react as it was touching us, our life, because any child is our child. This is what humanity means. And there is something completely disturbing about the incapacity of many of reacting to what they see. I mean, most of the people I encounter are people who are completely devastated, broken, and who cannot stomach the sight of splattered children or others anymore. People starving, people left without anything, people humiliated. And at the same time, who tells us? I know that it seems that the situation is getting worse. But as the historian Hilan Pappe says, this is the system that is collapsing and is trying to resist, to silence us all, to intimidate us all. But this is why we have to make our voice louder. We have to make our presence stronger. And it's not true that boycott doesn't work, because in fact, there have been several success stories of big enterprises who are divesting from the occupied Palestinian territory, while states are not, because of loss in their profits. And this is why I decided to look at the private sector for my next report, because we do not know enough. There should be UN literature about the military, surveillance, strategic, but also private, really civilian businesses, banks and pension funds, including in Europe. I mean, do you think that Europe is better? We rant more, but eventually there are still states who are considered very pro-Palestine who have investments in settlements. So when it comes to Palestine, no one has clean hands. And I'm serious about that. I won't elaborate, but trust me on that. And still we have an opportunity to do better. Now the Palestinians have a voice, have a very strong voice. And here it's not about being voiceless. It's about, as Arundhati Roy says, people who are not heard. And this is why it's our responsibility, in a way, to defend the defenders, to stand for one another, but also to realize what the Palestinians are going through these days. Because I often repeat what I've heard one Palestinian say once, and then you say, the fact that I'm in this country and I was born here by my parents in exile doesn't mean that I'm less Palestinian. In fact, as I see my people being slaughtered, I suffer, because a people is like a body. You chop one limb, the body suffers in its entirety. So, and as the Palestinians get killed, blamed, and smeared, we should understand what they're going through and express solidarity and support them. And this would be an act of humanity. And I say the same thing. I mean, I really think that this act of, this is what I say, when I say after October 7, we have missed an opportunity to show compassion and wisdom toward both people. And of course, it's mainly, I mean, my critique is primarily to member states who have fanned the flames of violence. But there was a moment where Palestinians and Israelis could have looked at each other and recognized the trauma and the pain of the other, and it has not happened. I don't think that the question should be framed in terms of Palestinians are not ready for self-determination. I know that this is very much supported by the political discourse, especially in this country. But again, this is why we need to recognize the discriminatory and colonial mindset behind that. Think of also how brutal it is. And I experience a lot dealing with member states who sort of come to me and say, yeah, but we provide support to the Palestinian Authority to reform. I say, but excuse me, have you seen your government? I mean, I was talking to officials in a country with a prominent fascist government. And I was saying, have you seen the government you have? With which authority are you going to reform the Palestinian Authority? Your obligation is not to deal with their internal business. You have to make sure that they are free. They're not exterminated in the little that remains of their land. Your obligation is to make sure that the right of self-determination of these people means something. And yeah, this is again, it's important to know. It's important to know both this basic international law is not complicated. Lawyers like to elaborate and sound very, very complex, but it's simple. Human rights are for the people, not for academics or scholars or others, even in the international organizations like the UN to cause about. It's for the people, of the people, and when they are attacked, it's the people who need to, who's eventually called for. One more.
Okay.
The land of God.
Okay.
Please ask them to show you the piece of the Bible, with the part of the Bible where it's written. Ask them. And again, as someone in New Zealand, a Maori, made me think this year is even assuming that there is a self-determination for Jewish people from all over the world in Palestine, how does it translate into the right to kill and eliminate another native people? There are countries with many different indigenous groups. How come Palestine is to be mono-religious or mono-ethnic? This is unsustainable. But again, I think it's nice to talk to Jewish people themselves, and there are many who are better articulated than me in this respect. But this is it's a distortion of religion, and religion should never be invoked to justify crimes. Just one thing, BDS at the UN, very little. I mean, but at the same time, the UN Charter authorizes basically what is being asked: economic, political, and diplomatic sanctions against a state who's a persistent violator of international.
Thank you very much, Francesca. Thank you so much for being with us.